Hello and welcome back to The Path, the podcast from Lifestyle RX. As always, I'm Dan, and joining me once again today is Dr. Brendan Byrne. How are you doing today?
I'm doing well, Dan.
It's good. All right, so in today's episode, we're going to talk about protein, which is one of the main dietary things we talk about during the program. We also always get a lot of questions about it, so I'm going to have a whole episode on it today. So why don't we jump right in and just why don't you explain what kind of a role does protein play in type 2 diabetes and why is it so important?
Yeah. So first of all, protein is kind of one of the three macronutrients. So we think of protein, along with fats and carbs as the three macronutrients. Protein is really important because, your body doesn't store protein. So you need to be thinking about getting your protein every day. And so it becomes kind of more important than carbs or fat in that respect, because you store carbs and you store fat. You don't store protein. So something you got to keep in mind every day. The other thing we really like with protein is it's super satiating. And so as you're starting to make changes, getting the protein intake in your meals correct will actually allow those meals to be more satisfying, satiate you, and will help you not overeat. And of course, type 2 diabetes, happens in the context of insulin resistance. And, I like to say insulin resistance is kind of a whole body response to energy overload, which comes from overeating. So protein will really help you kind of get your meals to deliver a nice satiating response. And so that's really important. And then the third kind of, thing to think about with protein is really that, it is one of your building blocks, right? So we don't really use protein for energy. We use it as a building block. And the big thing that it goes and builds is your muscles. And obviously type 2 diabetes and trying to achieve type 2 diabetes remission, your muscles are going to play just a vital role. And so you want to get enough protein, so that when you exercise, you're maintaining your muscles and building them, frankly, hopefully, making them stronger. So yeah, protein is pretty important, and it's something that, you kind of have to get right.
Cool. And then you mentioned carbohydrates and fats as being the other ones. How does the body process protein differently from carbohydrates and fats or other nutrients?
Yeah. So let's just kind of run through it, right? So if you eat a load of carbs, they're going to break down to glucose. Insulin is going to take that glucose and try to put it in your muscles. Or, as we always say, if you're active, you're going to get the carbohydrate, the glucose into the muscle without insulin. But the destination for carbs is your muscles. So 80-90% will end up in your muscles. If you don't have room in the muscle because you haven't been exercising or the muscles are not very healthy, that carb will go to your liver where it gets turned into fat. Fats come in as fat and they circulate, they go directly kind of in your main circulation, and they go get deposited in fat cells. So if you're not going to use them, now some of your organs will actually run off fat. So some of that will actually go to your heart and your intestines and so on and so forth. But for the most part, the fats will kind of circulate and go into your storage in the adipose tissue. Protein, though, comes in, it breaks down into amino acids, and there's no storage place for protein. And so what happens is essentially the proteins get distributed, the amino acids get distributed. Cells will pick up a little bit of amino acids and essentially to kind of replenish any amino acids that they're deficient in. So your body's pretty good at recycling proteins, but proteins do get damaged, and so you need a little bit of protein in every day to kind of replace those damaged proteins and those damaged amino acids. So kind of distribute like that. And then the big place where this really is so important is in your muscle, because while we don't store protein, you do have a lot of protein stored in those muscles. And so if you don't eat enough protein on a given day, you will actually break down a little bit of muscle in order to release those amino acids into circulation, where they can go to other cells and kind of do their thing. So the big thing you want to get that protein from the meal. You want to distribute that to all the cells that need it. And then frankly, you want to try to add as much of that protein into your muscle. And so if you've been exercising, your muscle gets a little bit of damage with exercise, and as it heals, it incorporates new amino acids, and it makes those muscle fibers stronger and bigger. That's really kind of what we want to see, is that you're loading it in.
Cool. And then you mentioned amino acids. So I know there are a few different types. I think there are essential, non-essential, some other types. What are kind of the difference between those amino acids, and how do they incorporate in?
Yeah. So when you look at it, there are 9 that are essential amino acids. I won't rattle off the names because I won't really mean anything to anyone, and I'd have to just look it up. Essential means that you have to get them from your diet, right?
Okay.
The non-essential means that you can take one of the essential ones and you can kind of convert it through some biochemical process in your body. In a way, when you look at kind of these things, I kind of think that the essential versus non-essential is almost a little bit distracting, just in the sense that it used to be that you'd hear stuff around, if you eat animal protein, so if you eat meat or you're getting dairy, those are complete proteins. They've got all the amino acids. But if you eat plants, you're only going to get some of them. So you gotta mix and match your plants. And there's kind of this all this famous kind of lore about how different cultures would match their different plant-based proteins. So the corn and the beans, and with native Americans, and I think that when we kind of look at that and step back from it, we realize that it's really just not important. They all kind of come in, they get broken down into amino acids, and they go into the circulating pool. So if you eat a variety of plants, you're going to get enough protein. You're going to get enough of the various amino acids that are in the proteins. So I think it's kind of a non-starter. There still are people that will kind of say, well, you need to kind of focus on these particular amino acids. But if you push anybody and who's deep in this area, and you say, well, seriously, if I'm getting if I'm hitting my target, so if I'm getting between 1.2 grams per kilogram and 1.6 grams per kilogram per day, am I really going to have to be conscious of certain amino acids? And the simple answer is no. So I think while noting that you have to eat these certain amino acids in order to get them, if you're eating enough protein, you can forget about kind of what amino acids are in which food.
Cool, that makes sense. And then I've heard before that the body can't store excess protein. So what happens if you eat more protein than your body needs? What does it do with it?
Yeah. So basically, your body will degrade the proteins, really degrade the amino acids. So it'll take the nitrogen component off, and you pee that out, right? And so it comes out kind of as an ammonia byproduct. It's why some traditional cultures used urine to wash clothes. So it's got that little bit of nitrate in it there, so that it comes out through the kidneys. But really, then what happens is the rest of that amino acid gets broken down, and it gets either turned into your body can turn it into glucose, so you can make a small amount of glucose from amino acids. Or the other thing that it'll do is it'll get turned into fat. And so if you really kind of think about it, if you're eating excess protein, and you're probably eating excess kind of calories in general, then most likely your protein is going to get turned into fat. And so the nitrogen component broken off, and then the rest gets stored as fat. There is a bit of a quirk with it, though. It takes energy to degrade the amino acid and end up storing it as fat. So it's a little bit less efficient than if you eat too much glucose or too much fat, that gets stored more efficiently. So calorie per calorie gets more efficient. So there is a little bit of an advantage to the excess protein being stored as fat. But it's not really that important to think about.
Cool. Okay, and then I guess the other common thing with like when you hear people say you should eat more protein is that it has an effect on your like satiation or like hunger signals. So how does that what is its role in that, and how does any more protein make you feel full faster, or how does that all play together?
Yeah, so protein is the most satiating macronutrient. It's really hard to overeat protein, and that especially kind of as we try to push to be sure that we're getting enough protein. Sometimes people just really struggle with it because it's like I just can't eat this much protein, and
Hmm.
bodybuilders do crazy things like wake up at 3 in the morning to try to get some more protein in because they're really trying to get as much protein as possible. And so protein is super satiating, and if you kind of hit the targets per meal, then what's going to happen is you're gonna be pretty full from that meal, and so that's helpful, right? Because then you don't overeat you don't overeat the fat
Hmm.
and the carbs in your meal. The other thing, and I should probably just say when we're thinking about this target, it is per meal, right? Because when you eat protein, there's this kind of sweet spot at which the protein gets absorbed into the muscle, and so too little, you don't get enough of a signal for the muscles to pick up the amino acids. So and this is kind of true once we stop growing. Like when we're before age 25, when we're growing, we can eat like any protein, we'll absorb it and store it away because we need protein so much for building. But after age 25, and so for most people in our program, if you had like a 10-gram protein bar, it's not going to do anything, right? Like, if that's your snack, what's going to happen is those amino acids are going to get broken down. They're going to go in circulation, but none of them are going to end up in the muscle, right?
Mm.
Because it's not enough amino acid to kind of get into the muscle. So you kind of generally need like 25 to 35 grams to get that signal to get enough amino acids to get the signal to store it in the muscle. And then you have this other phenomena that is, well, beyond 50 grams, you just don't absorb it, right? Like you can only absorb within this little
Too much.
window.
Yeah.
And so if you look at your protein requirements for the day, really kind of what you land with is that you pretty much have to divide it by 3. And, kind of the simple way to think about this protein requirement is just simply to go, you know what, it's depending on your size, it's going to be somewhere between 30 and 50 grams per meal per day. And that's
Mm.
3 meals, right? So,
Yeah.
so that makes it a little bit simpler. And if back to the question, if you do have 30 to 50 grams of protein with each meal, they're going to be satiating meals. Like you're actually probably not going to want to snack, 2 hours
Hmm.
after.
Yeah. And then I guess the question to that is like when you're planning your meals or trying to figure out what to eat, how can you actually get 20 to 30 grams of protein in a meal? Like what are some strategies to make sure that you're actually getting enough in?
Yeah. So first of all, we use this concept. We call them healthy protein packages, and it sounds kind of funny, especially because we also talk about getting rid of packaged food. So it's not packaging like it's not like it's not like cardboard or plastic packaging. But proteins come, they grow. If it's in an animal, proteins come with fat, and if you're eating meat, red meat, that fat's going to be saturated fat. If you're eating fish, you're going to get some omega 3s. So you kind of think what else is with it. If you're eating plants, that what comes with it is fiber, right? And
Mhm.
so we have kind of that infographic in the program that looks at different protein packages, and essentially what you want to just do is kind of look at your meal, identify where the protein is, and kind of be thinking about like your portions. Now, meat's super easy, right? Just because you can kind of just go, well, you're going to get enough with most meat, kind of 4 or 5 ounce portion. You're going to be around 30 grams. Your palm can help you. You just a palm size portion. Bigger people have bigger palms, so they get a bit bigger pieces, and smaller people have smaller palms. So works pretty well. When you get to plants, you have to be a little bit more conscious of it, right?
Mhm.
And so there, what you want to do with the recipe is identify, well, where's the protein coming from in this recipe, and realistically, how much protein am I getting? So again, the little infographic that we have is kind of helpful, but you can really just kind of identify like, where do I think the protein's coming from? How much of that's going into it? So if you're making a chili, and you're going to put in a can of beans. Well, that's a lot of protein in that can of beans, but in your portion, how many how much of that can are you getting, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
And that's where you have to be conscious. And often what we find with some of the recipes that we see is we'll sometimes you'll push up the amount of beans or chickpeas or lentils that the recipe calls for. You'll boost it a little bit so that your portion gets enough. So yeah, it is kind of one of those things. As you're eating more plant-based, you need to think of. But the other thing with plant-based stuff is there's such a variety that you can actually kind of cobble it together with a few different things, right? So you can put a bit of tofu and a bit of beans, and then you can, on your salad, you can have some seeds or some nuts. So you can kind of, pick your way around, kind of getting enough that way. But the first thing is you do have to be conscious of it.
Cool. Yeah. And then what are some, like, I guess, common misconceptions that people might have about protein intake? Like, I know some people think you only get protein from meat, and that's obviously, we already talked about that. But there are other ones that you hear all the time that you think like that are common misunderstandings.
Yeah, there's definitely, so there used to be, you have to, eat the protein within 2 hours after a workout, right? And there's this window that, if you ate the protein, then it would go into the muscle. Otherwise it wouldn't. We know that that's not true. And so it really is just focus on your meals and getting enough protein in your meals. It becomes the message there. The RDA is a little bit of a misconception in a way, because the RDA is set at 0.8 grams per kilogram, which isn't a lot. And so people have looked at that and said, we're all definitely getting enough protein. And when you kind of look across kind of, population level intake, we probably are getting close to enough. But it doesn't really take into account some other factors. And so what we see is, people are often kind of having meals where they get a lot of protein in them, but they're probably past that window of absorption. So that protein is really not helpful in that meal. And then they're having meals that don't have enough protein, which is going to be problematic, because again, they're not going to be able to get into the muscle. And then, frankly, if you eat meals that don't have enough protein, you're just gonna, you're gonna have trouble with satiation, and your brain's gonna keep looking for protein, so you're gonna be hungry, and you'll kind of overeat from that perspective. So the getting kind of the right amount of protein, I think, helps you kind of overcome this misconception. People worry about, well, isn't protein harmful to your kidneys if you eat too much of it? And the real answer there is, no. If you have kidney failure, and if you have severe enough kidney failure, you're seeing a nephrologist if you're in this category. So it's not like you have to kind of really all of a sudden run and check your labs to understand where your kidneys are. So if you have kidney failure and you're seeing a nephrologist, you may get some guidance for lower protein, because at that point your kidneys just can't get rid of that nitrogen component quickly enough, and it can change your blood chemistry a bit. But that's a really small fraction of people. Most people can eat a pretty broad range of protein, and so yeah, you don't need to really worry about that. I guess the other we touched on the plant versus animal misconception. I think those are the big ones. Yeah, and I think that, one of the things that we really kind of see, it's not so much a misconception, but it's really that we've learned more about, is, as people get older, it's harder to get the protein into the muscles. And so they've got a term for this: anabolic resistance. Anabolic just meaning building. It's just this resistance to actually kind of, and you see this in that people lose muscle mass from age 50 onwards, and that's a big contributor to type 2 diabetes. In fact, we've talked about subtypes here. The fifth subtype of type 2 diabetes is age-related. And I think a big part of that age-related type 2 diabetes is just that, you lose the muscle. And as you lose the muscle, you lose that carbohydrate buffer. And so you just tip into diabetes a little bit sooner as a result. So the whole concept of anabolic resistance really says, well, if you're over the age of 60, you really need to be trying to get enough protein so that you're getting those signals to the muscle. You have to be exercising to get into the muscle as well. So it's kind of a 1-2 combination. And so that's kind of where, we push the range higher, really on the basis of that research. And so kind of from a metabolic health perspective and from an aging perspective, you really do kind of need a higher dose to get it into the muscles, so that after you exercise, you can kind of maintain your muscle bulk.
Cool. Yeah, that makes sense. Um, we so we talked about you need to get enough protein in all 3 meals of the day. So I think a lot of people have issues with getting the protein in with breakfast, especially because the common breakfast foods most people eat aren't that high in protein. So
Right.
what are some I guess what is the topic of breakfast in general, and then what are some things you can do to get more protein with breakfast?
Yeah. So this is something that, it's kind of funny because it's also related to the, well, breakfast. I've heard that breakfast is the most important meal,
Yeah,
and
yeah,
then we talk about, time restricted eating where you go past breakfast, right? And so it's like,
yeah.
well, how do those two things? So breakfast means break your fast. So whatever meal that you break your fast with, needs to have enough protein, and it creates a signal for the body for the day, right? And
Mm,
so the worst you can do is, and we see this sometimes where people will come in and say, well, I don't really eat breakfast, but they stop by, the Tim's on the way in, and they have a double double and they have a muffin.
yeah.
And then they get to lunchtime or before lunchtime, they're super hungry because they've had no protein, right? And so
Mhm,
they've had lots of carbs and some fat, but no protein. And so, they're not really getting a satiation signal, and so their ghrelin or their hunger hormone builds all morning. And so then they hit lunch and they tend to overeat at lunch. Sometimes you can chase that hunger all day, and
mhm,
so you kind of get into this really disrupted pattern where you're kind of always feeling like you're hungry, you're always wanting to snack. So we just kind of look at it and say, okay, it's obviously with every meal it's important, but that first meal it's essential, because it's going to set your day up much better. And so there, it's really kind of, picking. And I think the fortunate part is most of us don't need as much variety with our first meal than we do with kind of our dinners, right?
true, yeah.
So you get some good go-to strategies, right? So, I I think anybody that listens to this podcast knows my breakfast. Start with some kefir. I'll put within that kefir a whole bunch of things with fiber in it, so like psyllium and chia seeds and some ground flax seeds. Then I'll add some hemp hearts, which are high in protein. So the kefir's got a bit of protein. The hemp hearts have a bunch of protein. Add my Greek yogurt, which has got a ton of protein. And then I'll top it off with some berries, which don't have much protein, but some almonds as well, which do. So by the time you add it all up, there's a lot of protein in that meal. Super satiating.
Mhm,
Tastes really good. I can eat it every day. It's a little bit different with different berries. And off you go. You've got one meal you just don't have to think about, right? So that
yeah.
falls now back into the habit category. Other people would be like, okay, I just don't like that type of food. So take a couple of eggs. You could scramble some eggs. You could take a little bit of tofu in the scramble, put some black beans in the scramble, some vegetables, and you kind of have an egg and tofu scramble. That'll be very high protein, and be a good start to your day. So, bunch of different ways that you can do it, and really kind of the thing with it. And I know when people are first starting with this, it's like, ooh, that seems complicated. I got to think about all this stuff. But you kind of just do once, right? You kind of know what your
Yeah.
target is, and you kind of, you do the spot check on the meal, and then you get a pretty good sense that, it's in the right range. And you kind of play around with what you like or don't like. And so that's a good way to do it. And then that sets you up for your day really well.
Cool. Okay, so the one other big thing that we haven't yet talked about yet is like protein powders or other sort of protein supplements. So when should you use them, if ever? And like, are there certain brands that are better than others? Like, what's the deal with protein powders?
Yeah, so obviously there's lots of different protein powders out there. Um, we like the simple ones. Our dietitians kind of as a rule like the simple ones with single ingredients. So you can get a high quality whey protein powder that just has whey protein in. You can get one that is, I think the one that the dietitians are always talking about is the pumpkin seed powder,
Mm,
from Omega Naturals. You can get the hemp, yeah, which is ground hemp seeds, and you get some protein and some fiber.
that one has a
That's
quite interesting taste.
Yeah, that's my favorite. It tastes like dirt, so it's good for you.
Yeah.
Right? You have your smoothie, do you kind of go, oh yeah, feeling the soil here.
Yeah.
So, so yeah, just don't pick ones that have stevia or non-nutritive
Mhm.
sweeteners in there. If they have a whole bunch of other junk in there, don't pick those. Right, you don't need them. And
Yeah.
then you can so what role do they play? Well, sometimes, and especially kind of as people are going with our program, there's a focus on trying to get rid of fat that's causing insulin resistance, right? And so to get rid of the fat that's causing insulin resistance, you're trying to lose some weight.
Mhm.
And so we use the time restricted eating as a good way to kind of keep you in the fat burning zone longer. So you fast for 16 hours, gives you kind of this 8-hour window. You break your fast with the breakfast that I just talked about. You might not be that hungry until dinner time, right?
Mhm.
Like, it really
Yeah.
can satiate you that long. And so sometimes people don't feel like eating 3 meals just because they're really getting good at fat burning. From an energy standpoint, they don't need a third kind of meal. And so, they're kind of having a smoothie, kind of, put a bunch of greens in it, put some protein powder in it, can be a good way to kind of get that third tranche of
Mhm.
protein for the day. So I think that's probably the biggest place it is kind of, for people that can't get enough protein because they can't eat 3 meals right now. Sometimes it's just timing, right? So it might be easier for you to make a healthy smoothie in the morning to get going with. So that can be a place that you would use it. You generally don't need it, as I said. It's not like after your workout you need to go have this protein to kind of get it in that 2-hour window, because doesn't exist.
Yeah.
It really is just get it in your meal. So I kind of look at it for you can make a really healthy smoothie that gives you enough protein that, frankly, meets the requirement for a meal. And then you might find that really works for you, just because you're relying on burning your own fat for the energy component of
Mhm.
of what you need, and then you get the protein in.
Yeah. Cool. I guess the other main thing is like, how do you recommend people track their protein, or do you recommend tracking it all? Like, there are apps that'll like break down food for you. Like, what's the deal with tracking?
Yeah. So first thing is I don't recommend it long term at all,
Mhm.
right? It just takes a lot of work, and you kind of don't need to do it. So one of the things that I'm always trying to impress people with is, or not impress people, impress on people, yeah, trying to impress you with it. Um, this random piece of knowledge. So you know, people will eat. So most people will eat somewhere between 1.2 and 1.5 million calories in a year. So it's a lot of, a lot of
That's a lot.
calories.
Yeah.
And if you're eating whole foods, most people will have no trouble maintaining weight within a pound or two. So a pound across a year is like 9 calories per day.
Mhm.
It's hardly anything. It's like 150 meters of walking, right? Like it's just nothing. So your brain is unbelievable at matching, kind of, detecting kind of what's in your food and matching it to your energy requirements and kind of managing all of that.
Mhm.
So, the notion that you could track this and do better makes no sense.
Yeah.
The other thing, you have no idea how much you're absorbing, right? And one of the things we see with, I posted this in the blog a week ago or so, was the microbiome enhancing diet, right? Which is basically a diet that's high in fiber and resistant starches. Well, when they got a bunch of people in the metabolic ward to figure out, like, well, what's happening with this diet, people eat, basically absorb, they when fed the same amount and eat the same amount, they absorb 116 calories less on this diet, because it's going out with their poop, and the bacteria are taking some of that,
Yeah.
and using that as fuel. And so, and you're getting satiation signals, so there's no deficit, right? Like your brain kind
Mhm.
of, so it's really complex, this notion that you're going to be able to kind of measure everything in your food precisely. And then,
And yeah.
we've talked about, kind of on the other side of it, on exercise, you don't really burn they're not really extra calories you're burning, right? So, you go out for a run. Yeah, you might have burnt 500 calories in your run, but your body will find about 350 or 400 of those calories just by turning other things down, in terms of energy use. So you didn't really burn extra calories. So the long and short, I don't recommend tracking this over time because it's just not going to be accurate and it's a lot of work, right?
Yeah.
What is kind of helpful though is as we're saying, like you think about, well, where's the protein coming from in my meal? How the
Yeah.
heck would I know? Well, these apps are great, right? Like, I think one of the favorites with the dietitians now is Chronometer. And it's really easy to use, and you can kind of figure out kind of within your meals kind of what's there. So that's kind of worthwhile when you're in the stage of kind of discovery. From a portion standpoint, it's harder. And here what happens is, we give you these kind of, we say kind of 1.2 to 1.6 grams per kilogram, which, I totally recognize that means absolutely nothing to anybody, myself included. It's like, that's not applicable to me. So then we kind of simplify it and say it really comes down to 30 to 50 grams, which then people come back, well, which is it for me, right?
Yeah.
And so you kind of can think about that from the perspective of, well, if you're kind of a slighter person, because it's really based on how much muscle you have, right?
Yeah.
It's not it's not based on your weight, even though we use weight because it's the only thing we have. It's actually really based on how much muscle you have. So if you're kind of a smaller, slighter person, then the lower end of the range, and if you're a big, muscular, strong person, the higher end of the range.
Yeah.
You kind of figure, well, in practical terms, what you do is you kind of figure out what the right range is, and then you push the protein a little bit, and you're it's so satiating. You'll be like, yeah, no,
Your
I
brain will tell
really
you.
can't eat anymore, right?
Yeah.
I'm full. And so you kind of land in that right range. And so that's a really helpful way to do it. You can, some meals you can kind of eat the protein first, so you get that satiation effect first, and we kind of do. There's some pretty good research there that's actually pretty helpful for type 2 diabetics to eat the protein first.
Interesting.
But if you're having a plant-based meal, that's kind of hard because it's like it's everywhere.
Or something. Yeah.
So the long and short of it is in your individual meal, sometimes tracking that with an app to figure out kind of where the protein is, how much protein is there, realistically in the portion I just had of that meal, like what am I really, and you'll find some real gaps there, right? So that's where it's useful. Then you kind of alter the recipe such that your portion is going to get enough protein, or you add some other things into your meal that you're going to get enough protein. And you kind of can notice that, hey, that meal's really satiating. You push it a little bit more in protein, and it's like, okay, that meal's like, I can't eat anymore. and then that meal's good, right? And then by and large, once you kind of get in the right ballpark, your brain will take over subconsciously. And it's something that, like, knowing the science about it kind of fascinates me, because I'll look, I have that same breakfast every morning, right?
Yeah.
Some mornings the bowl's fuller than other mornings, right? It's subconscious, like because you always have to make it. Like you think with yogurt, you got to make a decision which, like, I don't count them out, right? I'm not precise.
Like how many almonds do I shake on this morning, right?
Yeah, exactly, right? So that when they look at things, it's really quite accurate, right? Like your brain is actually able to figure this out. It's remarkable. So your brain's way better than any app. That being said, when you're trying to construct your meal, sometimes it's helpful to take the recipe and put it in one of these apps and figure out, okay, well, there's the protein, and wow, that's really not enough protein, and I've got to find another source of protein for this meal.
Yeah. Awesome. Okay, I'm always impressed on how deep we can go into these topics. This is great. So, anything else you want to leave us on protein before we say goodbye for today?
I think the last word always has to go to exercise. It's like, we can fuss a lot about our protein needs and protein requirements, and yes, you will get the satiating effects from protein, but you won't get the full benefits of protein without the exercise. So the two kind of go hand in hand, and the protein and exercise leads to healthy muscles. And healthy muscles makes your type 2 diabetes improve, and so I'll leave it with exercise.
Awesome. All right. Well, thank you all so much for listening. This was great. Thank you, Brendan, for providing us with all your knowledge once again. And if you know anyone that you think would benefit from listening to these podcasts, please, of course, share it with them. You can just take the link from wherever you're watching and send it over. And if you'd like to join the Lifestyle RX program, you can do so. It's covered in BC, Alberta, and Ontario by your provincial health. And you can do that at lifestylrx.com. So, yeah, thank you once again, Brendan, and we'll talk to you next time.
Thanks, Dan.